Thank you. So, Brian, you having fun? You enjoying this?
Probably more than Ann Curry or Matt Lauer are.
What do people most want to know when they ask you this? You've been doing this round.
There's a lot of what really happened with Ann last year, which I guess is the predictable question everyone asks. And I tend to tell people that it goes back to 2011, that they shouldn't have promoted her in the first place, that the mistake wasn't removing her, the mistake was promoting her.
Right.
Because then everything else led. That is my easy way of usually answering that typical question. What else people ask? They also like to ask if the anchors are the way they seem in real life, which I'm sure you get with the late night anchor hosts as well. And I never know how to answer, so I don't know if they're faking it when they're talking to me also.
Right.
But I think for the most part, at least Matt Lauer and Ann Curry are mostly what they're like on TV. That's been my impression.
Well, they don't have to. They're not performing so much as other
right.
people, but they shouldn't.
That's true.
I guess they shouldn't be. But so you've said, I know you said this a lot, that you started out with a totally different idea. This wasn't your idea. So what was your idea?
I thought I should do a book. I thought I wanted to do a book about cable news, about CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, about the rise of Fox, the death of CNN, and then the rise of MSNBC. I don't know why I thought that.
Well, it's a good topic, but the personalities aren't as good.
Right. In retrospect,
Yeah.
it's smaller, right? And even though it's very important and it influences the national dialogue, it's very polarizing. And when we went to publishers with the idea in 2011, every single publisher turned it down. And the response was almost always the same. There were two reasons. One was that Gabriel Sherman's doing the book about Fox. It's
News.
a big Fox
Yeah.
book, got a big advance for it. People thought that would saturate the market. And the other response was, if you want to buy a book about Fox, you never will buy a book about MSNBC because you hate them. And it would be hard to sell a book about all three
Right.
because you're going to hate half the people in the book,
Right.
which I hadn't realized, but which made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It made a lot of sense.
Yeah, logical.
And in retrospect, I don't know if you could do a book about all three of them. That's why Gabriel Sherman's book sold, just about Fox.
Do the people who watch GMA hate Today's Show?
I guess not. I guess
Not at the same
as
level,
much, yeah.
perhaps.
People do either love or really
Yeah.
dislike Ann Curry. She's polarizing.
Yeah.
But we went into a meeting. So my agent, we were so disappointed. We went into meetings with a couple of the publishers individually, just to brainstorm. Like, what did I do wrong? How can I write a better proposal next time? And the idea that Ben Greenberg at Grand Central had was, he said, "What about the mornings?" Which had never occurred to me for some reason, but I guess hadn't had anybody else
All right,
either.
but what was the state of play then?
Ann Curry had been promoted 2 weeks earlier on the
Uh-huh.
Today Show, and I didn't realize this was
All right,
a big
so there
deal.
was change there.
There was change
Yeah.
there. Meredith had left, and we had written a story on the front page of the business section on May 2nd, the day that nobody remembers the story because Bin Laden was killed the night before. But the story, it's still there. It says NBC about to announce the shuffle, right? And then
Right.
they didn't do it that day. They waited a week. But that had all happened. That was a big deal. It was business section news, right?
Right.
But I don't think we realized it was going to be as bad a pairing as it ended up being, because NBC didn't realize it, right? And the other thing that was really important that it just happened was Good Morning America just promoted Josh Elliott and Lara Spencer. I didn't really even realize they had just done that, but that ended up being really important to the Good Morning America story because that was a significant change that helped them get to #1. But I thought the book would be about the Today Show and GMA fighting and GMA coming close but not winning.
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe Matt Lauer would leave, and I thought maybe that would be
Well, that was
the
also his
action.
contract was coming.
Yeah, at the time, that was the speculation, was Matt was going to leave in 2012, and that would be a huge transition. I thought maybe that would create some drama,
Right.
but I didn't think they would lose.
Right. No. Well, why would anybody think that after
Right.
all that time? But what was your going into that? What was your connection to the players? Like, were you already comfortable with any of the players so that you had at least a leg up?
I feel like I had a disadvantage there, actually. I didn't feel like I knew the morning folks as well as I should, and I knew I'd have to learn a lot. So I tried to treat it as an education. I emailed people like Matt Lauer and Ann Curry and George Stephanopoulos the night before I announced the book deal and said, "Hey, I'm going to do this book. I have a lot to learn. I hope you'll teach me," basically. And they were all very polite about it and very nice. And I found that people were really generous, wanting to explain how it works, because it is such a weird time of day and the jobs are so strange that I think they appreciated that I wanted to learn about it.
Mm-hmm.
At least in the beginning.
Did you have any inside source that was really advantageous right from the beginning? You didn't have to name them, but was there already?
Not at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while to start to gain people's trust. more time than I kind of expected it to take. And maybe that's
Right.
normal in these projects. But it took a while. In the beginning, it was just going the typical route with the PR people saying, hey, I'm going to write a book. Let's have
Right.
lunches. Let's have coffee. And we had all those
How did
typical
they feel
lunches.
about that?
Everybody seemed really receptive.
Yeah.
Even
Because at that
the
point-
Today Show.
Well, but at that point, they were winning.
They were
so-
winning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, GMA was actually a little more, ABC was a little more apprehensive since they were losing.
But they were coming on, so
But they were coming
Yeah,
on, and Ben
yeah.
Sherwood's a very wise manipulator of the press. So he, I think, recognized
he's the
advantages.
president of
Yeah, we
ABC
should-
News.
Yeah, he was relatively new. He had just
Mm-hmm.
kind of taken over. I think he saw advantages to me learning about this ecosystem. Yeah, and who else? You know, at that time, I had an initial meeting with Steve Kappas, who was the head of NBC News, and a lunch with Jim Bell, the producer.
did
of
you
Today.
know
They were
them at
very
all?
nice.
I mean,
Yeah.
Kappas has been around, so
Yeah, I knew. I actually I talked to Kappas briefly about a job many years ago when I was graduating college. I was choosing between the Times and there wasn't ever an offer at NBC. I never had a job interview, but we did meet once and talk about what would it be like to be a campaign embed. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to be one of those reporters that stalks a candidate
Yeah.
for a year.
Mhm.
It turns out they fired most of those embeds after the election, so I'm glad I didn't go that route. It's weird to see. You can see the fork in the road and you see what direction that went. But I had known him, I guess, starting at that moment, and then I guess we had talked once in a while for stories, although we don't really write about network news as much as we used to.
no.
So I didn't
It's
feel like
not
I
as
knew them
relevant,
as,
but-
yeah, it's cable news has been more interesting on our beat, so I
Yeah.
feel like we know those guys better.
So, all right, but you start out, you have a sort of a plan. Let's see what happens with this.
And by the way, I thought
Competition.
CBS would be really important. So I reached out to CBS and had lunch with all
Really?
those people because they're rebooting their show
Yeah.
from the ground up.
Right.
They created CBS This Morning in January of 2012. I thought there was going to be a story of 3 networks and whether anybody could ever beat the Today Show. And everybody was wonderfully receptive, I thought, in the beginning.
Yeah. But I just wondered if you had did you do a proposal finally or not?
Actually, no. We just did a one sheet of here's what we're going to sell, and the publisher snapped it up right away because it was their idea. And
It was their idea.
It's kind of hard to sell it
Yeah.
elsewhere. We had to offer it to the Times.
But then
there's this weird thing at the Times where we have to
propose,
offer.
yes, to the Times publishing
Yeah.
unit first.
They thankfully passed, so we could go back to the people whose idea it was.
Well, that's right. Unfortunately, it was hard to get competitive bidding when someone already it
Yes.
was their idea.
Yes.
But usually, when you write a book, you have to write a proposal. You write some extensive proposal,
50, 100 pages. Right?
and you offer whatever.
Did you write one for the War on Late Night, or was that?
Yeah, I did. I did. But anyway, so but you're here. You were in the middle of it, and sort of things are. You must have realized quickly that the Today Show developments are now the drama here. I mean,
I don't think I realized it as quickly
personality.
as everybody else did, to be honest. I guess because I grew up loving the Today Show, and I just never knew it to be in second place. So I didn't. At first, I didn't believe it was going to lose, and then when it lost, I didn't believe it was as serious as it was. I guess because I thought they would bounce right back.
because they had the Olympics coming up.
Right, because they had Olympics coming up. So,
Yeah.
in April of 2012, the Today Show loses for the first time in the ratings.
In how long? 16 years?
16 years.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal, front of the business section, but it was an aberration. I mean, the Today Show bounced back the next week. And so even though it was a great kind of story arc for GMA, because they had finally, at least for 1 week, gotten the crown, I didn't think they were going to keep it. And I kind of thought, I don't know, for some reason in my drafts of the book in my head, it was still about the Today Show and GM,
Yeah.
still about the Today Show protecting its winning streak.
But the real issue really is the Ann Curry thing
Yeah.
happens at this time, and
Yeah.
right before the Olympics, actually,
Yeah.
right? And let's talk a little bit about her, because she really is sort of a centerpiece in the story. And so Ann Curry is a person who works on the Today Show for, I don't know how many years, but she
15
did,
years.
15 years.
As a news anchor.
As the news anchor, and considers herself the lady in waiting all this time.
Mm-hmm.
First because Katie Couric is the star of the show, and then when Katie leaves, they don't pick her. Instead, they pick Meredith Vieira because they're sort of reluctant about Ann, right?
They especially being Jeff Zucker, who was
Yeah.
becoming the CEO of NBC.
And their reservations about Ann had to do mainly with whether not that she couldn't be a journalist, but that her personality was not smooth, let's say, on the air.
She's
Right?
unpredictable sometimes. Doesn't
Unpredictable.
always transition well, doesn't
Right.
always toss to segments well.
Yeah, one of the keys to morning television is to be sort of a comfortable personality for everybody. and she made some people uncomfortable, apparently. But she also had a fantastic Q rating. Tell everyone what a Q rating is.
Yeah, millions of fans. These ratings are so strange because no one knows if they're real, right? But they're taken so seriously.
Yep.
These Q scores are they're a measure of your likability and your people's awareness of you and your appeal. They crunch all those different scores into a Q score. And Ann Curry's score was off the charts. It was like
Right.
22, and you're lucky to be in the teens if you're in television.
And the reason hers was good was she was very empathetic on the air.
Right.
She could tell a story about some tragic event and connect with people.
She was a great supporting actress.
Yeah, and in the background of the show, who was doubting her all along? Was Lauer always doubting her?
I'm not sure if any of the hosts really believed she was lead actress material. You know, Matt Lauer was uncomfortable hosting with her. Katie Couric, back when they were together, was uncomfortable with her. And Jim Bell, the executive producer of the show, who had kept the streak alive longer than anybody thought could, was concerned about her, was thinking, this is not the way to go. Zucker as well. Jeff Zucker, who was then the CEO of the company, had said to people, wrong, not the right choice. Do not promote Ann. Not that we don't like her, it's that she's not the right co-host. You know.
So how on earth does she get the job?
So how does
Brian?
she get the job? So I think there's a couple of different elements. I think, and to me, one of the most important ones is Steve Kappas, who's the head of the news division, who is supposed to be the one that picks these players. Really feels loyal to Ann. He went. He grew up with her in NBC News at a show called Sunrise in the early 1990s, this early morning show that no longer exists, really. And he was the producer, she was the anchor. So they knew each other for a long time. They were friendly. Either he had been at her wedding or she had been at his, one of the other way around. And they had a comfort with each other that made him think that it was her turn.
So he's the advocate, but really a key aspect is her contract.
Right. Her contract, which says if she gets passed over this time, she can leave the same day and go to another network the next day. And of course, that clause almost never exists in contracts. It must be very scary to be a producer and expect the woman that helps lead your show to show up on the competition. I think there was a third element that was really important too, though, and that's Matt Lauer thinking about leaving. Because Matt Lauer's contract was up in 2012. And if he had left in 2012, let me back up. Meredith Vieira is leaving. Meredith's one of the stars of the show.
It kind of surprises them a little by
saying she wants to leave.
leaving.
Yeah, it shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was to them. They didn't think she was going to leave. So if they had lost Meredith, and then if they had passed over Ann, and Ann left angrily to the competition, and then a year later Matt Lauer leaves, you've lost 3 stars in a row. The only time that's ever happened in morning TV, well, at least at ABC, Good Morning America, they sunk into second place and they couldn't get out for 16
Right.
years. It was a horrifying prospect to think about possibly losing all 3 of them. And I think the uncertainty about Matt helped lead them to promote Ann.
So Matt has a ton of leverage.
Totally.
Given that situation. And yet Matt, this is fascinating to me, what you had in the book, is that when he's told they're going to name her, his response is, okay, but. He kind of expresses reservations,
Right.
but he doesn't throw his body in front of it.
Right, he doesn't veto. And even in interviews since, more recently, he's come out and said, I had my concerns, I expressed them, but he didn't veto her. Not that he should have necessarily,
Well, he
because
probably
anchors
should
aren't
have.
supposed to be managers, but he probably should have.
Yeah.
I mean, one of his closest colleagues said to me recently, maybe if he had been more assertive, we wouldn't have gone down this dark road for so long. And it makes me wonder if anchors should have more management, more of a manager role sometimes.
If you think of that as a partnership,
Yeah.
right, and he's going to have
A husband and a wife.
yeah, and they present that as a family, and
Yeah.
and you know if the situation turns bad, and they knew this all along, it'll look like a divorce.
Right. Right.
Then
Totally.
perhaps he should say up front, no, I don't want to marry this woman.
That's right. That's right. After all, he did court Meredith Vieira. I mean, when he was paired with Meredith, that was a result. A lot of people say that was Jeff Zucker's greatest masterstroke as at NBC, hiring Meredith Vieira away from The View. But Matt had a big part of that too, right? He was taking her to dinner at his apartment and promising her that this job wouldn't take away from her family life. You know, that Matt really consented to that marriage. He was
Yes.
excited for that marriage, and he wasn't for Ann.
No, he was reluctant the whole time.
And maybe that's because he was thinking about leaving, right? Maybe that's because he had his eye on the door.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, 15 years as the biggest star in morning TV, I'd probably be looking toward the exit too.
because who wants to get up at that hour the rest of your life? But here's a big question that I don't know if you know the answer to that even still. So Anne has the out clause, and they're afraid that will leave her to the competition. Would ABC have hired her?
I don't know the answer. My instinct is no.
Well, their sense is that I've gotten from them is they were thrilled when she got the job at NBC because they knew she was not very
She was
strong.
weak, right.
So
I think CBS would have hired her.
maybe, but should NBC have been afraid of that?
Probably not.
So I'm wondering why they were so worried about that out clause. It seemed to me that Zucker would have said, "Go with God."
Right, right.
You know.
I think that's the alternative history that's so interesting about
Yeah.
this. NBC was being acquired at the time by Comcast. GE had owned it for over a decade, had managed it well enough. It had had a lot of troubles in prime time, et cetera, but it had had a consistent owner for about 2 decades, right? 25 years, more like. And then Comcast comes in and snaps up NBC. And all throughout Meredith Vieira's final year, Comcast is working with the government to get permission to acquire NBC. And when it's looking like it's going to finally close, NBC asks Jeff Zucker to leave. Comcast, asks Jeff Zucker to leave and puts in Steve Burke instead. I just wonder if Zucker had stayed in charge, or if Comcast hadn't come in and bought NBC, if any of this would have happened.
Did you ask Zucker? Would he have not put Curry in the job?
He wouldn't answer.
Uh-huh.
He wouldn't answer.
Uh-huh.
But I think the answer is clear that he wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Because he said in meetings in late 2010, don't promote her. Don't promote her. And,
Yeah.
it's easy to say that because he's not in charge and he didn't have to deal with it. He didn't have to find someone else. But there was a lack of creativity
He
there.
also was on the record of not putting her one time.
That's right. He had already passed her over.
He'd already made his.
But of course, then you
opinion
wonder
clear.
who else could they have hired, and I don't know who else they could have hired away.
Yeah.
You could say Savannah Guthrie wasn't ready. You could say Natalie Morales didn't have the personality. You could say that Kelly Ripa wasn't available. I don't know who they would have hired instead of Ann, and I guess that's why we're not paid the millions of dollars that the CEO of NBC is.
Right. He doesn't always earn it anyway.
Right.
So how much were you helped by? I found it interesting that you talk in the book about your own reporting occasionally. Like it was important that you were reporting this as it was going on separately for the Times, right?
Right. Well, it was awkward once, and the one time it was awkward was when it was clear they were in negotiations to remove Anne. I remember us talking about this in June when I was going to write that story because it was clear that was going to kind of ruin the book. It was the biggest plot. It was the biggest thing to happen, and I couldn't not write it for the New York Times. I had to put it in the paper. If I didn't, someone else was going to.
But there was no chance it was going to wait until the book
to happen. No, that's true. But what I mean is I knew that I was becoming an actor in the plot because by doing that, by making it public, Ann Curry has told her friends that took away her ability to leave gracefully. And you might call this an excuse, I would call this an excuse, is that by making the negotiations public, she was so emotional, she was so distraught that she was crying on the air and all of that. I don't believe that, but it is what she says, so it's possible. Certainly, I think NBC wishes it had been kept a secret, but they were trying for so many months to do this. I'm kind of amazed it didn't get out sooner. I'm amazed they kept it quiet as long as they did. I'm kind of embarrassed I didn't know sooner, frankly.
Well, sometimes even if they'd have keep a tight circle.
That's right.
It can be hard, but
and there are still secrets. There's still things I wish I knew.
Yeah.
I'm sure in 5 years we will know more about what Ann was really doing and what Matt was really thinking.
But do you think it helped or hurt to be reporting separately? Because isn't there an advantage to having two competitors? Can't you play them off each other a little?
You
know
can,
what I mean?
but I can't remember a time when
you know what
I
I
did.
heard from GMA, what they're doing.
Right.
You know?
Most of that didn't ever get into the paper, though.
No, I meant for the book.
Yeah, but I guess for the book, it could help. Even with basic things like getting ratings, access to data, and things like that. Because whoever's winning gives you the ratings. So they want to provide the number. If they're losing, you don't want to provide the number. That sort of thing was helpful. I was able to say to the Today Show, I'm at the Good Morning America control room this morning. Don't you want me to come tomorrow? And that was probably helpful to be able to play them off each other that way. Today was really accessible until the negotiations with Ann started, and then I couldn't get in anymore, and that was frustrating because I felt that if they had given me access up until then, they might as well just keep going. The networks do this in a really strange, interesting way. They'll let you into their studios if you swear it's off the record. You can take notes, but you have to clear the quotes with them later. Did
So
they
it's
ever do
essentially
this to
on
you?
background.
Yeah, right. Basically, yeah, exactly. Do they do this with you as well?
I didn't really spend a lot of time in the studio with them. I would go to offices and stuff. I wouldn't.
Like I did an
wouldn't sit in
overnight
the
shift
show.
at GMA, and it had to be off the record. And ABC put, of the 6,000 words I gave them to put on the record, they put on 5,900. They cut out a couple curse words, and that was about it. NBC cut out every single reference to Ann Curry. It was
Well,
as
that
if
was.
they
But
were
that
making
by
her
that point they were
disappear.
now. They were now trying to make her a non-person.
And they
so-
also cut out every reference to Jim Bell, who was the top producer of the show.
Mhm.
And it was as if in the control room he was invisible. It was kind of awkward. I couldn't really use the control room material because it felt like lying to delete them. But I did like being there at least, even if I couldn't use it all, because it made me so much more sympathetic to their jobs.
Yeah.
The jobs are so hard and they look so easy, and it was helpful at least in that way.
Do you think ABC was particularly because they were starting to, come on and potentially win? They were particularly enthused, and so
Yeah,
I
probably.
also felt a lot of times that I had to be careful that I wasn't being manipulated.
Right.
By
Right.
one
There
side.
there were times on the phone with ABC sources where I had to hit the mute button to stifle my laughter at what they were saying, because what they were saying was so clearly self-aggrandizing and
Yeah.
promotional, and I knew I wasn't going to use it. But it sometimes helps to listen to it, I guess.
Yeah.
At least they think they can say their piece.
Mhm.
I was surprised. I thought what ABC did that was very interesting was they were starting to win for the first time. They tried to act like they didn't expect to win. They tried to act unexcited by it.
Right.
And for example, the morning that they celebrated in the newsroom, they had this big party in the newsroom. They had champagne at 11 in the morning and all that. And they didn't invite me till 10:30. They called and said, okay, now you can come over. They were trying to play it cool, I thought, even though they knew that this was going to be a story of how they got to first
Was
place.
it not sort of the goal of Ben Sherwood's life to do this?
It was. It's
To-
remarkable how obsessed he was
Yes,
with
and driven
winning.
with this idea.
With
Yeah.
winning. But I suppose that's what happens when you lose for so long.
Mhm.
And in his case, in the mid-2000s, he was the producer of GMA. He was the third or fourth producer to take over while the show had been losing. And he came within
got
about
really
40,000 viewers.
One-
he came,
one
you know,
week.
which is
Yeah.
really, in Nielsen language, one or two homes, probably.
Right.
Right? It must have been, agonizing. And I think that's what drove him to want to push so hard to get back there. It also, I'm sure there are also internal political reasons why, right? In order to get promoted inside Disney, I'm sure it helps to have that Good Morning America win under your belt.
Well, no, I think the Disney people made it one of their gigantic goals was to
Yeah.
do this. It's like if you're playing, I don't know, if you're any sports team and you play another team and they beat you every single time, it probably drives you insane after a while.
I wish I could have explored that even more in a psychological way,
Mhm.
because there's no other competition like that. And the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal compete, but not like that.
And even in television, nobody loses that much.
No.
Nobody loses 16 every week for 16 years.
No.
That's
Or if you are
it's
losing,
never
you're
happened.
like CBS and you don't have any chance
Well,
of getting it first.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You're not in that same league. It's Fox and MSNBC. At least MSNBC can celebrate a few wins in some demographics some nights,
Mhm.
and they can feel good about that. Good Morning America had nothing to feel good about, and yet still had a lot of viewers who liked the show.
They did, and they made a lot of money.
But I do think the competition makes them each so much better, right?
Yeah.
Because they're fighting. The more competitive they are, the better the two shows are.
You should point out this is hugely financially significant for the news divisions.
I'm struck. I've been struck in interviews for the book how people are surprised by these figures, that $1 billion is divvied up between ABC, NBC, and CBS every year in ad revenue, and in the mornings, just from 7 to 9 a.m. Today makes even more thanks to its other hours of the day that it has. They even have been dreaming about a fifth hour in the past. GMA's been dreaming about a third hour because the mornings are where the money is.
So how much money we're talking about will change hands because the Today Show's not number one?
Feels like 40 to 50 million. NBC won't, a year. In other words, because of the loss of second place, it feels like a $40 to $50 million hit. NBC won't confirm that, but the bonuses for their managers last year were cut a bit because of the Today Show loss. And that was proof that it hurt, that they felt it in their paychecks.
Now, we should point out that even though today is losing, they're still close in the money category.
Really close.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, the competition is more interesting now because among total viewers, everybody ages 2 and up. Today GMA wins by about 800,000 viewers a day. Sometimes 600,000, sometimes 1 million, but right now 800,000 viewers a day. But in the demo, 25 to 54-year-olds,
which is where all the advertising money and news is
even
spent.
though it makes no sense or it's very
this
illogical.
Is what the news advertisers pay for.
Right. It's tight. It's 10,000 viewers. It's 20,000 viewers some days.
2 weeks
it's really
ago, Today
anybody's
Show
race.
won.
They won, yeah. And they win when there's big breaking news. They still have that news advantage. So
they won the week of the Boston
the manhunt,
bombing.
right? Yeah.
Manhunt. Yeah.
So in some ways, it's a more interesting race now, but it gets masked by the fact that in total viewers, GMA wins by so many people.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're torn. I mean, it's hard to know what the more important number is for us because from a cultural perspective, total viewers is more important. It's bragging rights. But in the demo, in the business section of the paper, the demo matters.
If it gets to a point where Today always won in the money category and ABC always won, it would be very hard to distinguish. But at least ABC is still winning in both, so it's not generally speaking. But it is close. Yeah. You mentioned people ask you about personalities. I'm going to do it too. Because you spent time with these people and you may have new insights into them. So give us a take on, let's say, George Stephanopoulos.
The odd one out on Good Morning America. Because the rest of them are more entertainment-driven than he is. But he brings news to the show. He is the news on the show, and it's valuable to have him there for that reason. I found him to be... I shouldn't have been surprised by this, but ruthlessly competitive. So much more interested in the ratings than I thought he would be. But think about it. He grew up in the Clinton administration, data-driven administration. The only thing more addictive than political polling is the overnight ratings. Mm-hmm. And he said something really, what was very educational to me this time last year when Good Morning America won for the first time. That was nice. But he said when it won the second time, that was much more important. He said for any democracy, the second election is more important to prove that you can stay on the board, that it wasn't a fluke. And that's when I realized, when he said that to me, that's when I realized this was a seismic change, not just a random sort of aberration.
Mm-hmm. You think he's comfortable doing this?
I don't, but I think he's found a way to accept it, he sometimes says in production meetings, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this story? But he said it to me in an interesting way. He said, I know that I'm not the audience for the show. When I ask that question, I'm trying to figure out what does our audience want from this story so I can express it. And I thought that was an interesting rationalization.
It's interesting. He's quite a different talent set than Matt Lauer.
I assume that part of the appeal for him about the show is, frankly, money and time. Right? It's a much bigger paycheck than you would get from just doing the Sunday morning show he does. And it's a lot more time on television, a lot more airtime, and to reach a much wider range of viewers.
Yeah. Do you think he'll do it a long time?
There were lots of guesses about whether Josh Elliott would replace him,
right.
Whether someone would replace Robin Roberts. But I think the fact that they're winning changes that calculus.
They can't do much.
If you're winning, you don't want to mess it up.
Yeah.
And if you're winning, you're probably feeling better when you're going to work in the morning. You're probably more celebrated. So I would be surprised if there's any big changes this year.
So what about Robin?
Robin is the one person that there's two. There's two people that I came away just mesmerized by, and that was Ann Curry and Robin Roberts. Probably no surprise, they were the two leading ladies, to use a cliche, last year. When I had lunch with Ann Curry, I just sat across from her, I never wanted to leave. I was just fascinated by her. And with Robin, the same way. She fit me in for an interview between the show and a chemo appointment, and yet she made me feel like the most important person in the world. I was just so kind of astonished by that. And I kept trying to find people that would talk badly about Robin, and I couldn't find people. Mm-hmm. I couldn't. The only person I could find was someone talking about her 10 years ago. There was not a person I could find, even before she got sick again, that would speak ill of her. And I found that very telling, because it was easy sometimes to find bad quotes about other people.
But again, she doesn't seem to be the ideal choice.
No.
For the role.
No, she's unmarried, she's childless, just like Savannah Guthrie now on the Today Show. Mm-hmm. And if you ask Jeff Zucker, the model for a morning show is a man and a woman. The woman's supposed to have young children. They
Right.
can grow up with the show,
Mhm.
which I think is what he's trying to do with his new show on CNN. He's hired a woman who just got married, who may have children soon. He's
Yeah.
trying to recreate the 1990s Today Show
Well,
at
because
CNN now.
the audience is often is a woman at home with her children, and if the woman host is talking about something they can be
Yeah.
empathetic with, it kind of works that way.
It was groundbreaking when Joan
But-
London did that, right? In the 1980s, had never done before.
It used to be. It was originally the guy was the main player, and then it became the woman as the main player. Certainly under Katie Couric. But is Robin genuine? Do you think?
I thought she was.
Yeah.
And I was skeptical going in. I was very skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
And, to be fair, access to her was relatively restricted. It's a funny word to use, but what I mean is I couldn't talk to her as often as the other anchors because she was sick and because I think ABC was being very careful about not trying not to overexpose her while at the same time covering her illness every day. They walked a very careful line covering her illness last year. But I found her to be very genuine. I was struck by her.
I was going to sort of skip over the CBS people, but only because
People are amazed by CBS's show, though.
Yeah, but the
Don't
show
you
is.
find
I
that?
think the show is kind of the format is. But
Yeah.
I mean, is Charlie Rose really an advantage to having him? Is Gail an advantage?
I'm always struck by the people who ask me about that show and tell me they really adore the show and actually really adore Charlie at 7 in the morning.
Are they under 50?
Some of them are. Some of them are. Some of them are under 30. And of course, it's all anecdotal, and it's only
Right.
beginning to show up in the ratings. But the show is starting to perk up in the ratings a little bit.
Yeah.
It's still 2 million viewers behind the other two shows, but it's starting to perk up. And I wonder if CBS can just be consistent and patient, which they've never been before. Maybe it'll work. I mean, maybe. I really wanted to write
If
about
it takes
CBS.
a long time, though,
Right.
Charlie won't be around.
He seems like he's got staying power
He
to
does.
me. I spent so much time at the show, and I had written so many chapters about CBS that then got thrown away because in 2012 it didn't the ratings didn't rise or fall. They just did the same thing. It was a boring story. But I really hope in 5 years I can use that material. If the show
if they make
does
some
finally
progress.
work,
Yeah.
if it makes some progress.
All right. So what about Savannah Guthrie?
I don't know what to say. There were some interesting noises in the room just now.
Well, interestingly,
I'm on Team Savannah, but I know a lot of people aren't.
well, Savannah had a fantastic week during the
Totally.
coverage of the bombing, and got great press for that, and has been a pretty respected reporter. But it looks like she's not. Her personality hasn't been, enough to change the momentum for sure.
Right. It's hard to. I would preface by saying, how did Katie Couric do her first year? I don't know, but I doubt that she shined right away.
She did.
Did she?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we knew she was a star.
Yeah.
Instantly.
She had this star quality and was perky and appealing, and
Was it still mostly the Bryant Gumbel show, though?
he thought so.
I just wonder with the Manhunt if we saw Savannah Guthrie for the first time come into her own and make it more of her show. The skepticism I hear of Savannah most often is that she's got the news, but she doesn't have the personality and the entertainment skills and the ability to do the softer segments. I wonder if that could be fixed in part by bringing more cast members in and making it more of an ensemble like GMA is.
They got a lot of cast members.
And I
on
wonder
that
if
show.
they're gonna do that.
They try to, move her maybe into the 9 o'clock hour a little and
Right.
use her there. But
Right. Right.
She seems more comfortable than Curry did, though.
She does.
In her skin.
She
So,
does.
I
I mean, and what you can say is if at least she didn't get completely tarnished by the inquiry removal, right? Because she could have been completely ruined the way Deborah Norville was.
Yeah.
At least that didn't happen. She is the right age. I mean, she could be on the show for 15 years the way Katie Couric was if she is accepted by the audience.
Mhm.
And the Q-score data I've seen for her shows that people who know her like her, but most
Yeah.
people don't know her. I'm amazed by that, but it shows that in TV it takes a long time. You got to be patient.
Well, I always thought when Charlie Gibson was the host of Good Morning America, and he was there for, 15 years or something, that he could walk down the street in Manhattan, no one would know who he was. he just didn't have a big personality that came through on television. He was fine. He was perfectly fine. But there's something about
Right.
a personality that can
He leans
either
back.
either
Yeah.
jumps through the screen or doesn't.
Are you predicting a Savannah Guthrie
I don't know. I think
removal?
I think
Another-
Savannah's. I think she's okay. She might be too tall. I think could be, but.
Sometimes that's what matters the most.
All right,
right?
so
It's true.
let's talk about Anne in the sense of what she brought to the show was this, reputation for empathy, et cetera, et cetera. But what she was criticized for was she didn't have chemistry with Matt. She didn't seem comfortable in the soft segments. Her clothes were kind of weird, which I know seems superficial. But I know from my own wife would put it on and say, why is she
Polarizing.
wearing that?
Yeah,
What is
polarizing.
that? Why is she doing that?
Yeah.
And I just wondered, did she not have an advisor, right? Someone, was she not listening to advice?
I think both of those were problems. One was that she didn't have good counsel. Two is that she wasn't always getting it when she asked for it. I mean, this is a very split issue. Her allies say that the producer of the show, Jim Bell, was never giving her help. Jim Bell's allies say he was giving help and she wasn't listening. And maybe both were partially true. She does seem like someone who, if she doesn't want to believe something, she doesn't believe it. That you couldn't always get through. And a lot of people feel like she was just in denial about her situation. But it didn't help that Steve Kappas, her buddy at NBC News, was telling her it's going to be okay, you don't have anything to worry about right now. She was caught in between these feuding men who were in charge, who were telling her different things. And I feel bad for her for that, at least. I do, in retrospect, think she wishes she had a lawyer or an agent early on to protect her.
Her agent died,
Yeah.
actually.
Before she got promoted.
Happened, yeah.
And she didn't, she thought about getting another agent. She talked to other agents. And she has told people that she just didn't want to, she wanted to keep paying the family of the dead agent. Didn't want to go give her commissions to another person. I don't know if that sounds a little bit too good to be true to me, but
Yeah.
that's what she's told people.
Yeah. All right. We
It's a shame, by the way,
haven't brought
that
her-
she, yeah.
We haven't brought up Natalie, but it's interesting to me that Natalie Morales, who I think is a very attractive woman in a lot of ways, was never really in the running for this. She had the right path because she'd been the news
Right.
reader, and that's what has been the path before. It was the path for Matt and,
Yeah.
and Savannah
Yeah.
and Anne. So what was the issue with Natalie? What is the issue with Natalie?
People have said to me at NBC, they've said, they just didn't think she had a personality. And I can't tell if that's fair or not. But television is so subjective. And several of the top people that I asked, who wouldn't put their names to it, but they would all say pretty much the same thing. She just didn't have the personality to carry the show. Now, maybe they're just not giving her a chance. I mean, she had a pretty decent Q score. I don't think it was off the charts the way Anne or Meredith's was.
But she also has, she's an ethnic personality. They could sell that. There's an advantage to that, and I don't know. It seemed to me she had more potential than they recognized. But
Right.
I don't know.
It does speak to how subjective this is. I mean, at one point they talked about taking her off the weekday show altogether, putting her on the weekend show, and just shelving her over there. And they decided not to do that. But the fact that it was even considered speaks to how they didn't view her as highly as they maybe should have.
All right, so now let's talk about your mortal enemy, or what's he called you?
Nemesis.
Nemesis. That's the word. Matt Lauer.
I still don't know if that's true or not, by the way.
Whether he said that or not.
Well, yeah, New York Magazine in March said that Matt Lauer perceives me to be his nemesis. And every other word in the story was true, so I'm guessing it was true, but I don't know. I've never heard it personally.
Yeah. Well, so going into this, did you have a relationship with Lauer?
Going into it, no. I think I just met him once before. I emailed him the night before I announced the book, and I told him about it. I found his private email address, and he wrote back right away and said, "Congratulations, so excited for you. Best of luck. I'm not going to talk to you for it, but I'll recommend
he said that up
friends."
front.
He said that up front. And I
Interesting.
wish I could. I wish I had said that in the book, because people have made it out to be as if he refused to speak to Brian. No, he just always declines interviews. I mean, I can't remember the last time he was interviewed in the Times. I mean, it's been he's a really press shy guy, and I didn't think I needed his cooperation, to be honest. I just didn't think he'd be able to say what he wanted to say on the record anyway. I would have loved to get more from him on background or off the record. He wouldn't do that either. That would have been great. But I just figured his
But did
friends
you
and
have-
family were going to be more helpful than he was. So I wasn't that frustrated that he wouldn't
But
talk.
was there friction that you detected right away?
Not that I ever detected, no. He was always friendly when I was on set, in the studio, making small talk. But, that's what he's got to do. That's part of the job. I did interview him for the paper last year in London, and he consented to that, and he was fine during that. So I was surprised that people, although it was probably good for the book to create this sense of this battle, I didn't feel real to me, it didn't ring true. I suppose if anyone was going to write a book about the year in which your number one show fell out of second place, I suppose.
But he didn't know that going in. So
But
it's
no.
interesting that he was
Yeah, it's
resistant
interesting
from
that
the
he passed
beginning.
from day one.
Because my own experience is that they may say they don't want to talk, but if you find out things they really want to know, that you know,
Right.
it makes them a little less
Right.
resistant.
I did
but,
try to get him out for coffee or a beer and that sort of thing, and he didn't answer. But he did recommend friends, and I thought that was more important.
All right. So, but since
do-
the book has come out, and
Yeah.
since you knew, then you get this sense that he feels like targeted or victimized or
Yeah.
whatever he feels like.
There's this sense that he's had so much bad press,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think the bad press is a result of bad public reactions.
Yeah.
Bad press doesn't happen in a vacuum. Bad press happens because people suddenly turn on you in the public sphere, and that's been frustrating when people at NBC come out and say, "I'm trying to defend Matt Lauer from all this bad press." No, that's not the issue. The issue is that people who loved you really don't like you anymore, who are viewers, former viewers, and that's what they've got to work on. I think the press has actually been relatively conservative, considering how bad it's been.
Yeah.
For his Q score to drop more than half, it doesn't happen in TV.
And is that? I think you're right that he hasn't taken a beating like Bryant Gumbel would have taken a
Right.
beating on this. But I think there's also a perception that he's actually really good at
That's
what he
the
does.
thing is, it's not that he's changed, right?
Yeah.
It's that perceptions of him have changed.
Yeah.
I think some of this has to do with, I don't know what it is about our culture, our society, but when we're given one reason to dislike someone, then we come up with lots of other ones.
Yeah.
It's probably happened to Obama since 2008. It happens to sports figures all the time, right? And so
Happens to Anne Hathaway.
that's right, Anne Hathaway
Why do
or
people
A-Rod
hate
or-
Anne Hathaway?
Right. And I think, the way that they screwed up removing Ann Curry, people took it out on Matt Lauer, unfairly probably, and then once they disliked him for that reason, then they found other reasons. Well, he makes too much money. Well, we don't know what he's doing in his personal life. The National Enquirer says he has affairs. And all of these old
All right, but
stuff
that's an interesting question.
got picked
Part
up
of
by
this,
the web and became new.
The New York Post did a lot of page 6 items on him, right?
Right.
Did you get a sense that ABC was planting this?
I didn't, but people say that.
Mhm.
Here's what I figure. I figure if ABC is out there leaking stuff about NBC, they're not doing it to us because they know that we probably wouldn't fall for it.
No,
At least I
well,
hope we wouldn't fall for it.
yeah.
But they probably do it to others. I do assume they do it to other people. But I don't think all of it's ABC. I think some of it is NBC. I think some of it is people inside the network.
Well, and some of it, in the case of the Post, is also the whole
Yeah.
News Corp.
And in the case of the
Fox
affairs-
News hates NBC,
Right,
and
right.
there's a little bit of that undermining of NBC.
In the
I think,
case of
going
the
on.
affairs, I didn't ever believe that Matt Lauer had ever had any relationships with anyone else besides his wife. And then when I would go and have drinks and have dinner with his bosses and with the executives of the network, they would make fun of me for not believing it. They wouldn't just say they believed it, they would mock me for not believing it, as if it was such an open secret that everybody knows. And that really kind of stuck with me. That really made an impact because I thought, well, if these are the guys that have to clean up the messes, and they not only think it's true, they know it's true, and they make fun of me for not believing it, that kind of resonated with me.
Well, interestingly, I think there's been some comment that you included this rumor in the book.
Right.
And what was your decision
Yeah.
in that? Because obviously you can't prove it.
Okay, right. The only people
Yeah,
who know are
yeah.
Matt Lauer and whoever else he
And then,
has
Natalie
ever talked
Morales
to.
was
Right.
was the other subject
Right.
in
Right.
this, and they're both married people. They both
Yeah.
could feel like that's
Yeah. So they're-
scurrilous or whatever.
I don't know if this was the right logic because in retrospect, I wonder if I should have done more reporting about this. The fact that NBC responded so aggressively to this one paragraph makes me wonder if I should have looked into it more. Makes me wonder if there was more there. Makes me wonder if I did more research. I kind of purposely
Well, were you
didn't-
sure?
Well, I purposely didn't,
You were
for
right.
example, go
That's-
out to the Hamptons and try to talk to Annette Lauer at her home. I purposely didn't try to go and talk to
I don't know how that would have
Natalie Morales' husband. I could have been that guy,
Yeah.
right, who stalks people's
Yeah.
homes. And I chose not to be.
Well,
and I had this kind of rule of thumb, which was I would never print something in the book that was personal that hadn't been printed before. and this might have been the wrong threshold, but there are rumors about anchors' sexuality out there. There are rumors about people's private lives. And I decided if it hadn't been published before in a way that was widely known, I wouldn't be the first. There's stories about executives' personal lives. I just didn't want to be the first person. But the reason I thought Matt and Natalie was important, there were two reasons. One was it's been published widely, National Enquirer and elsewhere, and it's the kind of thing that people ask you if you're writing a book. So is it true about Matt and Natalie? Another reason I thought more importantly was it was used against him last year. Once people turned against Matt Lauer, Radar Online and TMZ and other people started printing stories about these old rumors. And I realized that part of the reason why his Q score was dropping was because people were angry at his personal life. And so that was in my mind, the rationalization. I know NBC disagrees. They don't think that his personal life has anything to do with his Q score, but I kind of came away thinking it did.
Okay, but when you wrote about his Q score for the Times, we couldn't put that in there. Right?
Right.
So there was a somewhat different
Although I thought it was interesting,
the
the Times Magazine editor did want to include it. The person who wrote,
really?
Then we decided not to. I think maybe other editors disagreed, or we could cut for space or something. I don't know. I don't know if it would pass the Times standards or not. I don't know. I'm glad the Times has high standards.
Yeah.
But
we
I also
don't usually
think
get into that unless it's like
right.
We know for sure he had an affair.
It's hard in this, and I've said this to NBC so many times. In this internet age, you can't ignore the headlines that millions of people see online. You can deny them, you can condemn them, you can accuse the people that are publishing them of hate, but I don't think you can ignore them. And I think NBC made a mistake last year in trying to ignore all the bad press around Matt, because here's the thing. People magazine readers are Today Show watchers. Us Weekly readers are Today Show watchers. Radar Online readers are Today Show watchers. So they're going to believe that stuff unless, even if you deny it, but especially if you don't deny it.
But I wondered about, the only reason I really wondered about this is that you know Matt Lauer hasn't talked to you, right? People know that, right?
Right.
They know he hasn't talked to you. And I think there's a question about, someone's going to raise a question, well, if he did talk to you, would you keep that out?
Right. But that's the issue we face every day, and hopefully people know that we try to be independent and fair about that. And the truth is, I think it would have had to be included because I would have had a chance to ask him directly.
Yeah.
And he may have denied it.
Then he would have denied it.
He's denied
yeah.
it. Well, I don't know if he's denied it technically, but NBC has denied it in the past. And he probably would again. And that would be important to include, I'd be curious to ask him, where do these claims come from? Why do so many people believe them? Why do so many people bring up other people's names? What has that done to your family? What is it like to be a public figure and have those rumors out there? What does it mean when they're Googleable and your kids can read them? One of the other interesting elements of this, I think, is that, the Couric removal video, it's on YouTube, right? When Deborah Norville and all that nonsense happened at the Today Show, at least it wasn't on the internet where you could re-watch it every day. Because Couric's fans still hold a grudge against Matt Lauer. They're still so pissed off at him.
It's pretty fresh
and
still.
It's partly because it's kept alive on the web in a way that these things weren't 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
So are there any stories that you developed and you really liked but you couldn't get in because you couldn't quite confirm it?
That I should repeat here?
No, you don't have to repeat them here. Are there any?
Yes, you do.
Well, there were definitely ones about people's private lives. I mean, there were definitely, there are elements, I think, that involved the inquiry removal that were just personal vendettas and personal relationships and stuff. But I didn't want to be the first to put those things in print. Again, I might regret that now, but I kind of felt like I had to hold that line for both networks, so that when one network would say to me, why aren't you writing about X, Y, and Z, I can say, well, I'm also not writing about A, B, and C. I felt like that was a fair line to cross. I do have a lot of material that I personally loved from the set and the control rooms of the shows that I wish I could have included, but it just, in the narrative, didn't make sense. They were just funny anecdotes and funny stories, because these people, these are high wire acts, and yet they have so much fun with it, and they're making so many jokes in the control rooms, having so much fun. And I kind of wish there was a reality show about the Today Show or about Good Morning America, the way that didn't Oprah do that for her last season?
Yeah.
She did Oprah Behind the Scenes. It was a great show on OWN. I think NBC should do one of those on Bravo for the Today Show.
Is there
or E.
They would have to have that same basis they talk to you about, though.
Right, off the record, and to approve the quotes, approve the scenes,
right. So was there some really thing that you got and you got so excited that day knowing, oh, this is fantastic?
And
then you had to worry that it would get out somewhere else first.
There were a lot of things that got out between the time that I reported them and
Yeah.
the book came out, and it was so frustrating. New York Magazine had a cover story about Matt in March. The story was incredibly spot on. I could tell he talked to the same people because he had the same quotes. It killed me. And then I realized it's probably good. It's getting attention for the book.
Well, he mentioned Operation. Did he mention Operation
No, he didn't.
Bambi?
That was
No.
the most important that
Yeah.
was able to get held back. So I remember the day over the summer that I heard that it had been called Operation Bambi internally, the removal of
The
Ann
removal
Couric.
van, yeah.
And I should say that it has been, Jim Bell has denied using the term, but I'll tell you why I tend to believe these things. I tend to believe people more in the moment than I do 6 months later. And I'm not saying people are lying later, but I tend to believe what I gathered contemporaneously more because people still had their jobs. People didn't know how bad it had gotten. They had less reason to cover things up in the moment than they do later. So that was kind of my
It's also such
rule of thumb.
a apt metaphor in a way.
It
that
makes
it's
a lot of
hard-
sense.
Hard to imagine it just got made up.
And so I heard it over the summer. It was a night I was driving from Maryland to New York, and I was doing a long, I was trying to convince people to trust me. And so I'd have these long conversations about random stuff. And at the end of the conversation, Operation Bambi came up. And, I instantly told my girlfriend about it. I was like, this is huge, because it speaks to how she was treated internally, that she wasn't respected. And in a lot of environments, in a lot of workplaces, that would be hilarious. Some of the things that Ann Curry had to deal with would be funny in our office, in our workspace. But when you're so vulnerable the way she was, it can be really hurtful, really painful. And that was one that I just,
Well,
gosh, I hope that
the
doesn't
term
come
fits
out.
her in a way too.
It
She is kind
does.
of a deer in the
She
headlights
has Bambi-like
personality.
eyes.
Yeah.
She does.
Yeah.
She really does.
All right. So something that you missed that you were frustrated about.
Well, in the fall, as I had to start writing, because when Ann Curry gets removed, we realized, we want to get this book out as soon as we can. Good Morning America is now clearly winning. The Today Show drama is continuing on. I had to start writing in September. I wished I could have done more about what it was like at Good Morning America after they won, because I have a feeling, some claws probably came out. It's probably not as, I'm just guessing here, but it's probably not as friendly an environment as it was a year ago. Once you win, people want to reap the rewards of first place, and I wish I could have gathered more about that, but I was so busy trying to get chapters done that I couldn't spend as much time reporting that out. And thankfully, page 6 has written about some of that. There's been some of that elsewhere. There'll be more, I'm sure, but that was something I wish I could have had more time for.
You going to do a paperback edition?
That's what they tell me.
So
So
you're
maybe
gonna
a new
You may
chapter.
alter that. in
Maybe a
some-
new chapter,
in
yeah.
some ways.
Yeah. In some ways, the next 2 years are going to be more interesting. I mean, how is Good Morning America going to stay on top? How are they going to keep this momentum going? Does Robin Roberts, after going through this illness that almost killed her, does she really want to wake up every morning at 4 in the morning? Does she really want to keep on this schedule? If not, how
Well,
in the world
I
would they
got to
replace
ask
her?
because we always say what a terrible schedule and all that, but people tend to stay on these shows
That's
because you're on television 2 hours a day. It's hard to give up that incredible spotlight.
That's
I
true.
think for your ego.
Even if Friday nights are catatonic and you can't
Yeah.
go out with friends that night, it's worth it. Yeah, it's worth it.
I don't think they
And they are
protest
almost by
about it.
definition millionaires. They're,
Well,
they're being
yeah.
compensated well to do these jobs.
Yeah.
Although we'll see if that changes. I mean, we'll see if in the next 10 years, if the audience of these shows start to erode more. They've mostly held steady.
Remarkably.
More so than other times a day. But you got to imagine they're going to erode more as more of us wake up in the morning, roll over, and look at our phones before we turn on the TV. You got to imagine the shows are going to be hurt by that. If I'm Starbucks, I'm starting a morning show. Because I've already got an app on people's phones, and I've got screens in people's in my stores. Why are they not trying to hire Robin Roberts and produce a morning show? They can go direct to the public that way. And I wonder if that's going to erode more and more the audiences for the two big shows.
Well, let's get some questions from our audience and
Could you?
ask Brian.
So wonderful and refreshing. Could you just offer 10 little words about Morning Joe?
Oh yeah.
Because so,
You
The
know
most
Morning
innovative show in the last decade.
so many people love it. More and more
Yeah.
people say that's what I watch. But apparently it's not making even the tiniest inroads into these other programs.
Well, it reaches the, dare I say, the most important viewers, right? Because it reaches about 500,000 people in the morning. It's reaching New York and D.C. and Boston. It's got the Northeast Corridor locked up. It's got all of the top editors of the New York Times watching and all the heads of the other networks. It's Les Moonves at CBS. Would love to have Maureen Joe on his network. I don't know if it will, I doubt it will ever get a lot bigger audience than it has now, but it doesn't really need to. Because it's got the viewers it wants, right?
But it
And
sort of
it's
says,
influencing
doesn't it, Brian, that the reason they keep doing that other format, I mean, with the man and the woman and their cooking and all that stuff is because that draws a big audience.
Right.
And when you just do the subject of the day, which is what Morning Joe does, and it's more of a discussion show, you lose people who are not that committed to that and want to see something. But
who are more casual.
because they're getting dressed and they're walking through and they just want to see 10 minutes or something. I think that it was great innovation, I think. But it's actually perfect for cable because it is narrow.
And it's good that we have cable that can give us a dozen morning shows that are smaller. You know, Fox and Friends and even NFL Network has a 4-hour morning show. Golf Channel has a 4-hour morning show. I thought the
Morning
book would,
Drive, it's called.
Morning Drive. I thought the book would involve those more, but frankly, once the Today stuff happened, that was the story.
You can't get too far from your main story.
I wonder if Joe Scarborough, as ambitious as he is, will look for brighter, greener pastures. He flirted with going to CBS a couple of years ago. I tried to describe that in the book about how close they came to leaving. And, although he decided to stay, I feel like he thinks MSNBC is too small for him. I don't think it is, but I think he thinks that way. And I wonder where he could go, or what office he'd run for.
Yeah.
He's dreaming about
Another
it.
question there?
You talked about like the old boys club at NBC and this and that, and kind of organizationally, that kind of environment can just be so debilitating for organization. And I can only imagine the other internal relationship stories that you came across. But and, your book, I'm sure, has been incredibly disruptive for that old boys club there, and now with like Deborah Turnus being looked at to replace Steve Pappas' old job. Do you feel like NBC is going to have a change to a more kind of feminine environment there, and then also like how long that will take to kind of filter down into the rating?
I'd be really surprised in 5 years if there aren't women producing at least a couple of these big morning shows. Right now it's almost exclusively men. But about 2 weeks or 3 weeks after Ann Curry was ousted, this woman, Pat Philly-Chrishell, was put in charge of all of NBC News' assets, and MSNBC and CNBC. This new layer was put in. As a result, Steve Pappas left NBC News. So basically, Pat Philly is now in charge of the whole news division. For the first time, a woman is in charge of that news division. And I do feel like we're gonna see subtle differences for that reason. I mean, it's gonna be hard to put our fingers on it, It won't be, but when she came in to NBC News last year, she said right away, this show is not evolved, it needs to be faster, it needs to be fresher, it needs to be brighter. She identified the right problems, I think, right away. And she put, although some people say she wanted to put a female producer in charge of the show day to day, she ended up not doing that. She promoted the number 2 at the show under Jim Bell to run the show day to day, but she did put another female executive on top of him to oversee the show kind of from a big picture point of view. And it seems like that was another step that another thing she did to try to break up that boys club atmosphere. I don't know if it's too early to judge how it's doing, but I feel like that was a concrete step they took. And I'd be surprised if Good Morning America or other morning shows don't, try to increase the role of women at these shows.
It's
Because
remarkable.
there's a lot of
in a
female
way.
producers.
It's remarkable
But
because
that
it's a
top
woman.
layer is mostly men.
Women dominate the audience.
Yeah.
And yet they have not dominated. I mean, there was a woman at GMA for years,
Right, Shelley Ross.
Yeah. But generally speaking, this has been all men producing those shows. And
At CNN's new morning show, the top 2 producers are now men. They were promoted a couple weeks ago. I mean, it is strange, and I would never came up with a good excuse for it or reason for it. I mean, I would ask people, and they never had a understandable explanation. And they just
interestingly, there've been more women producing the nightly news
Huh.
than have been in the morning,
Yeah, that's a good point.
which is remarkable. You'd expect the morning to be an area where women would dominate
Right.
on the producing side, but they
Interesting.
don't.
Going back to Morning Joe and women, it always strikes me that Mika is so meek. In so many ways, and I think that correctly reflects the fact that Joe doesn't want a stronger woman on that show, and also that it's mostly male dominated and probably highly male watched, more so than any of the other shows. But I really think they could use a stronger woman, or somebody should kick her in the back and say, come on.
Kick him in the back.
Partly, I feel like she's playing a character, though, who is supposed to let him talk, and then jump in.
puncture him in some way. Yeah.
I think part of that. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, the danger of Morning Joe is that it becomes too much of a character, too much of a parody of itself. But then again, when that happens, I think they latch on to something like gun control that they've done tremendous work on, and they and they fall out of that parody. So I do think they do have a problem with the number of men around the table every day versus women. It's very noticeable how male-dominated the show is. And I've noticed lately some activist types pointing that out and trying to gain attention and awareness around that. And I wonder if they're going to be under more pressure to try to diversify
I think it's
the
great
show.
you made the meek a meek comparison.
Yeah, it's a good.
I've not thought of that before, but it's fantastic. So we'll take one more question.
I like that. It's fine.
What about Jenna Wolf on Weekend today? She was, I think, a temporary anchor, and then she was removed, and I picked it up immediately when she was removed. She became very unhappy.
Yeah.
Very
Had a hard time hiding it.
disappointed.
Yeah.
Is that indicative of NBC and how they replace people? Or is that just an isolated story?
Well, they used to be so good at transitions, right?
That was their. Supposedly they were the greatest at transitions because they could put a person, Brian Williams would be the guy to replace Tom Brokaw, and Matt Lauer would be the guy to replace,
Yeah.
and Meredith Vieira. And then they never did it well in late night, let's face it. It's hard to do, though. It's very hard
It is.
to change people and have them not be pissed off.
I think the logic in both the Ann Curry and the Jenna Wolf situations is we want to keep them at the network. We don't want to lose them, so we'll give them jobs that are better for them. And we see in both cases that's an awkward transition to do. I think both Jenna Wolf and Ann Curry have something else in common. They're polarizing. Some people love her, some people really don't like her in both cases. And that's not great in morning TV.
No.
It's great in cable news. It might be great in some prime time, but it's not great in morning TV. And, I wonder if that's something that holds them, that has held both of them back in the past. I do think it's interesting that she's going to have a baby soon. She came out as the first openly gay host or co-host of a morning show at NBC. Sam Champion is openly gay now on ABC on Good Morning America. These shows are increasingly reflecting the diversity of the country in a way that's unimaginable 20 years ago.
Some diversity.
Not all
Yeah.
the way. Definitely
Yeah.
not all the way. There's a lot of racial diversity that's lacking on the show. There's others as well. But these shows have started to evolve in ways that are very interesting, and in ways that I think would be stunning to producers that were there in the 80s and 90s.
We're going to wrap up, but I'm going to ask my last question. Okay, so you've written a book. It's always hard to do that when you have a full-time job.
You covered for me a little bit last year, thankfully.
You think you'll do
Very
another
lucky.
soon, or will you take a long break?
Do you hear my girlfriend's moan at that? I don't think I'll do a new one soon. I am frankly really looking forward to writing 1,000-word stories for the newspaper again. I feel like I'm rediscovering how fun that is. But I'm sure I'll be tempted at something in the future. I'm sure.
When a book comes up, that's when you know it has to come up, sort of.
Right.
So.
It does. The weird thing is it was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. It was incredibly painful at times and stressful, and and yet now I look back with only happy memories of it.
It's like having a baby, man.
I forgot.
Let's face it.
I've forgotten. Yeah.
You forget the childbirth. You just remember, hey, you got a nice baby.
Yeah. Now
See?
I look back with love. Thank you all.
Thank you.